This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. For more than 60 years, the Citizens Committee for Children has worked to make New York City a better place for children. Its unique approach to child advocacy combines its highly regarded public policy research with a very much admired tradition of citizen activism. Jennifer March-Joly is its executive director, and she's my guest today. Welcome.
Thank you.
I remember Citizens Committee for Children way back when I was much younger. They had a training program for, I guess it was basically for women, or mostly women who came, where you took people through different agencies and the thing. Do you still run that?
It exists still today. It's existed, I think, now for over 50 years. It's the community leadership course, and it's for lay people as well as child-serving professionals and people from any walk of life that are interested in learning about the conditions that children face in New York City.
How long does it go on?
It's a 10-week course every fall. We usually have a roster of 25 to 30 adults.
Yeah.
And we have a parallel class for high school students that runs fall and spring.
Is that right? It's a fabulous thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's really a gateway to help people who are making midlife career changes and want to give back in New York City, individuals who are trying to decide where to give their philanthropic giving, and also people that are trying to really just improve their understanding of the conditions children face and the child-serving systems that exist here in New York City.
So how does one get to be a part of it?
You just apply online on our website.
Oh, good. CitizensCommitteeForChildren.org.
CCC New York, spelled out, .org.
The organization is how old?
68 years old. Founded by one of our most prominent founders was Eleanor Roosevelt. Really founded on the idea that citizens in the city of New York should speak loudly about the needs and interests of New York City children.
She was so fascinating, wasn't she? I belonged to a youth organization that she founded called Youth Builders, and it was based on the same thing, that to be a fully developed person, one should be a participating citizen. I mean, it just was a strain that ran through everything she did, it seemed to me.
Right, and I think the fundamental message is really needed now more than ever, that all New Yorkers really have an interest in making sure that every child in New York City is healthy, housed, educated, and safe.
Yeah. And what's the situation now?
Things are pretty bleak. We put out every 2 years a book called Keeping Track of New York City's Children. It's a really large data book that describes or really tells a story about what life is like for New York City's children in every borough and community district. And while we can say with 20 years of data that we've seen some positive improvements, child poverty is declining, infant mortality has declined, teen birth rates have declined, what we do know when we look at the most recent data is that the recession has had a profound negative impact on New York City's children. And we know that 1 in 3 children now live in poverty. That's over 500,000 children living below the federal poverty threshold.
So, and it ranges from what age to what age?
Birth to 21.
21. I have never been able to adequately follow the results of the welfare reform, because I think that came at a time when I was, edging out of public service. What has that had an impact on the number of children in poverty?
I think what we've seen, if we look at the city data, we've gone from caseloads well over 1 million to caseloads of several 100,000 of people on public assistance. We've seen greater numbers of women working. But what we've also seen is a failure to really sustain support for the things that help parents work and children prepare for and succeed in school. In particular, dramatic reductions in childcare and after-school programs in the city.
But the people who aren't on public assistance, are their children living in poverty?
Yes, I mean, there are several ways to measure poverty. There's the official poverty threshold, families living under $22,000 a year for a family of 4. And then there are the working poor, and there are dramatic numbers of children living in working poor households who often aren't entitled to basic supports because there's an income threshold to those services.
And so what would the income threshold, it's all different for size of family, number of children and everything else. So when you said there are not adequate supports for all these women going to work, brings us to the current crisis that we face, which are the drastic cuts in childcare, once again, and in after-school programs. I mean, to expect women to work, and then we provide no answers or assistance to taking care of the kids while they're working, right?
Yeah, it's really shocking in a city that's really kind of created a national reputation for education reform that we've kind of forgot about the other two essential ingredients in successful education for children. Early education, we know from all of the research that the earlier you intervene in a child's life with an appropriate, well-structured early education program, the better off they'll be. They'll start school ready to learn and they'll thrive. They'll be less likely to need special education services or remedial help. And we also know that after-school programs help children with their academic work as well as keep them out of trouble. We've seen in this budget a proposal to eliminate another 47,000 seats in these systems. And if this goes through, if you look back to 2009, we will have lost 60% of the system over this several-year period.
When we talk about the system, childcare has always been the most complicated, I think, mistreated in a way because it's never had the prominence of the need and the priority it should have. But what are we talking about when we talk about childcare? Are we still talking about childcare centers that are run? Are we talking about small childcare centers or in-home childcare?
Well, primarily we're talking about child care centers. So these are community-based organizations that have classrooms with children in them, certified teachers, teachers' aides, and a curriculum that they must follow.
They're all CBOs?
Most of them are community-based organizations, yes. There are some child care programs that exist in schools, and there are for-profit programs as well. The decline I'm talking about is in the city subsidized system.
Yeah, and what does that look like? Describe what a city subsidized childcare center would be.
It's a community-based center with 2 or 3 classrooms. Each classroom, serving, 20 or fewer children with a variety of staff, social workers, attendants to help with meals and, depending on the age of the child, change with diapers and change of clothes, as well as, music, play.
Places to rest.
Yes, places to rest.
And are they different from the child care centers that were there 20 years ago, 10 years ago? It seemed to me the early childhood subsidized centers that landed up years later being in neighborhoods where the demand wasn't that high. So it was always a talk about how you change the arrangement.
Right. I mean, I think the city has struggled as the population has shifted.
Yeah.
Child care centers have traditionally been placed in high poverty neighborhoods. They still largely exist there. There are some communities that have centers that are allowed to provide not only care for the working poor and the poor, but also someone who can pay tuition. In the city subsidized system, that's rare. But in general, the quality of childcare has dramatically improved over time. We realize that it is not babysitting, it is actually education, and that there are real curriculum requirements and staffing requirements in these centers.
So when does a child go from childcare into pre-K?
At age 4 in New York State.
And we don't provide, do we provide pre-K?
The state of New York funds pre-K, but
it's not part. But the difference is it's not part of the public education. It's not part of the school.
It is part of the
Department
school
of
system,
Education.
but because of facility constraints, it's also provided in community-based organizations that are providing childcare. And universal pre-K, in large part, is only 2.5 hours of the day. It's not a full-day program, so often a child enrolled in pre-K is then enrolled in childcare for the later part of the day.
And what about kindergarten?
And kindergarten is not mandatory, but generally starts at 5, and it is in the school system.
But we don't have enough spaces, do we? Isn't it a crisis to get into a kindergarten class?
Well, I think in the competitive schools that are doing very well, yes, it is a crisis.
Yeah. And so, but that's then the Department of Education. That's not anything subsidized.
No, but I think what you're bringing up is there's a real opportunity, I think, in this administration and the next administration to think about how do we start engaging a greater numbers of children as infants and toddlers in a well-structured early education program, help them transition to universal pre-K and enter kindergarten ready to succeed.
So how do we do that?
Well, I think we look at population trends, we look at school facilities, we engage the community-based organizations that provide high-quality childcare in a conversation about how do we begin to map out a plan to reach greater numbers of children in the city of New York.
And also, it's never really been adequately involved in development, has it? I mean,
Right.
in builders who are building projects or building large apartment houses or building any apartment houses and getting any kind of public subsidy with it to provide some space.
Right, so just like the city is interested in incentivizing the placement of grocery stores in new buildings,
Yeah.
they should be incentivizing the placement of early education centers. And I think the challenge has been that the funding for subsidized childcare is so volatile that it's a really tricky business to enter into. I do think, though, in the future, we should try to think about mixing incomes. I mean, we live in an incredibly diverse city,
Right.
and people appreciate the diversity if you
Right.
live here, and we should be trying to create maybe sliding fee scale childcare centers that allow one person to pay full tuition and not be subsidized sitting next to a child that has a subsidy.
We already do that in new buildings, don't we? There's subsidized housing in regular commercial housing. So now, faced with these immediate cuts, what's the usual procedure? It's to lobby, right?
Right. But I think what's unique about this year is CCC is part of a unified coalition called the Campaign for Children, and we've actually encouraged our youth colleagues in the youth service world who care about after school and our childcare colleagues who care about childcare to come together to really form a unified front to ensure that during the city budget process, this is the highest priority, that we not only restore resources for these programs, but we mobilize New Yorkers and getting them to tell their elected officials that this should really be a high priority for this administration and in the next mayoral campaign.
Do you have ties with other cities and national groups?
Citizens Committee for Children is a member of Voices for America's Children, which is a DC-based umbrella organization that helps us communicate with child advocacy organizations all over the country.
Yeah.
I think the uniqueness about our organization is we're municipally based in the city that has the greatest number of children in it in the country.
But how do we organize, I mean, really, to change the priorities given to childcare and after-school programs?
Well, I think New Yorkers need to make themselves heard. They have to call their elected officials, write their elected officials, participate in viral advocacy campaigns, turn out when we have press events and rallies, and they need to speak to their friends and colleagues and tell them that this is a really basic, fundamental thing that we know children need, and every child should have it, irrespective of whether or not their parent has the capacity to pay.
But you know, I mean, there's so much room. The state and the city are changing the whole juvenile justice system. How many children and how many youths in the juvenile justice system do you think could have been saved with quality early childhood education, then followed right through school?
Well, the research suggests that there's a $3 to $140 return on every dollar invested in early education, and we know from the research through Fight Crime, Invest in Kids that the resources spent keeping children constructively engaged in an activity between 3 and 6 dramatically reduce crime. So it is ironic that we're focused on spending millions of dollars on a young men's initiative that addresses, Black and Latino youth that are out of school, out of work, or that we're reforming the juvenile justice system to bring youth close to home, which we've supported, and at the same time decimating 2 normative programs that actually prevent the need for those investments down the road.
Exactly. So what's the organization you mentioned, or the slogan you gave us? Fight Crime?
Fight Crime, Invest in Kids there's a national organization that did some research on the benefits of investing in 3 to 6 p.m. Programming.
And that included people in prison also?
Yeah.
I mean, the number of people in prison and the cost to the states is so high. And, well, in California, they've been letting them out. Does California have a different kind of child care system than we do?
That's an interesting question. I don't know off the top of my head. I do know in New York State, currently, we're spending about $266,000 per youth per bed in our juvenile justice system. That's more than the cost of a Harvard education. It's obscene. So,
I mean, are there political organizers in addition to researchers and volunteers? We need to really do something drastic to bring some kind of common sense to this whole area. It's so frustrating.
Well, my hope is that we not only have the common partners of people that work in the direct service world and the advocacy arena, but also members of boards of organization who are often business people, very well placed in terms of their wealth and social connectedness to other influential people. And we really need greater leadership in the city of New York, and have those individuals come forward and say, investments in these basic things are really the right thing to do.
But it's always been considered an extra, it's women doing, you know, it's never taken by a man. I mean, can you see Peter Vallone Jr., who heads up the Committee on Public Safety? Why isn't he more of an advocate for childcare and after school?
I think our expectation is to engage him and every other council member. I mean, the good news is that the reductions in youth and childcare are kind of the biggest thing happening in the city budget this session, so that's good. And the other good news is last year we had the vast majority of council members really campaign aggressively with us to restore childcare funding.
But it's always restore. Why don't we expand?
Right, so we want this year to make sure it's not a simple one-shot, that it really has to be baselining, and we need a plan to move from
Do the
here.
employment centers that the city now runs, I mean by contract, do they have any child care facilities in them?
I don't believe so, but anybody on public assistance is entitled to child care.
Yeah. So if they were coming to the employment center, they'd have someplace else to take
Right,
the child.
and the real challenge is, as public assistance roles have increased over the last few years because of the recession, because the pot of money for childcare is not increasing, or after school is not increasing, you basically have working poor families that have played by every rule, that have a job, that are doing all the right things for their kids and families, getting kicked out of a system that's designed to help people find work.
Right. So then they become what, unemployed?
Well, they are threatened with unemployment and might wind up back on the public assistance rolls.
Right.
This is exactly what we don't want to see happen.
Now do we have more families with children in homeless shelters and homeless than we've ever had before?
Yeah, off the top of my head, I think it's 16,000 children in shelter on a daily basis.
And these are families that are basically, well, I guess there are some working poor people in the shelters.
Yeah, there are many working poor people that really just can't, sustain their housing. I mean, we've seen the most recent census data suggests that I think it's 40% of New Yorkers pay more than a third of their income toward rent. And in certain communities, you have this compounding impact of not only living in poverty, but housing stock is very poor. And, there's a lot of economic fragility of households in New York. It's really frightening.
It is. It's so sad that it's just making us terrible. How are people, immigration, are people who are immigrants, or is there a whole thing about being documented or undocumented to get into childcare? Do you know?
In large part, New York City has actually been really progressive on immigration issues and doesn't really force disclosure for most public programs.
Right.
So I don't think that that's a problem. I do think the general problem is the pot of resources hasn't expanded, it's declined. And so while we have greater numbers of children needing childcare and after-school program, we're seeing serving fewer and fewer every year.
So, and also as we have more people who speak different languages, are we adjusting with that, with the childcare?
Well, I think any community-based organization you talk to would say that that's really one of their biggest challenge, having high-quality help that are multilingual.
Who works in a childcare center?
Well, you have certified teachers, you have teachers' aides, you have assistants that help with basic things like helping children with their meals or change their clothes or at nap time. And then some programs are really incredible and bring in, musicians and artists and musicians. I mean, it depends on
So there's
where
a whole
you are.
range and difference, isn't there? And what about, is there still childcare in a home?
Yes, there is still family daycare.
Family daycare.
Although,
How quickly we forget
yeah,
things.
the city's emphasis is really to move children towards greater numbers of centers and to improve the quality in family daycare
So
settings.
if you're driving down Jamaica Avenue and you see a storefront and it's some kind of a childcare center, is that chances are that that's a city subsidized community-based organization, or?
Well, it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
On the city's Department of Health and Mental Hygiene website, you can actually look up child care centers online, see whether or not they're properly licensed with the City of New York, have they met health and safety standards, know whether or not they're private or publicly subsidized.
If they're private and they're in-home family daycare, is there adequate inspection?
If they're a licensed family daycare provider, there is adequate inspection. If they're an informal provider, there's close to no inspection.
Yeah, and nobody knows that they're an informal provider.
Well, there are vouchers that are used, often by public assistance recipients, because they have a very short period of time to secure childcare, so they rely on their neighbor or relative, and that can be really problematic.
So we come up to another question. If they have a short time, then it means there are waiting lists at every place, or what?
Well, they have to engage in work or workfare, so they have a short period of time through which to secure
A job.
Intern position or workfare position. So it means they try to make a childcare arrangement that's quick.
I see. And then if they get a job, they stay there?
Yes,
Depends.
or they
Yeah.
perhaps go on a waiting list for a subsidized center, because that's often a more stable
So how long
arrangement.
are waiting lists?
That's a good question. I don't know. Some centers,
Must be growing.
yeah, some centers carry them, others do not. But we do know that there are over 100,000 income-eligible children that aren't receiving subsidized childcare.
100,000.
Yeah, over 100,000. Yeah, because there's not enough money to reach them.
And this is, and with the cuts, then it becomes less, or what?
With the cuts, we're going to lose 47,000 seats in childcare and after school. And if we look back to 2009, it would be 90,000 over that period of time.
And how many seats do we have?
Oh, off the top of I think we're going to end up with 50,000 seats, 53,000 seats if these cuts go through. So we're hovering around 90,000 now.
50. And how many children do we say are living in poverty?
500,000.
Under the age?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is really almost like, it's the end in a base. I mean, it's a struggle from then on, right? It's depriving kids of really the kind of future that we want them to have.
Right, but I'm an eternal optimist. I mean, thank
You have to
goodness.
be.
And I really do believe that New Yorkers care about the well-being of each other. And I think that this campaign is really about making sure that we motivate a really wide cross-section of New Yorkers to tell the mayor, the city council speaker, and the council members that this has to be really the ultimate high priority.
You're funded basically by contributions.
Yes, we're privately funded. We don't accept any government money. We don't provide a direct service. We don't represent a sector.
Right. But the public daycare is funded by the governments, the
Yes.
city and state.
It's largely funded by state, federal, and local resources, yes.
So that what people who have a lot of money and believe in increasing childcare, what can they do?
Well, I think that they can sign up on our e-action membership list, so they can get every alert that we send out, which will prompt them to make calls, to go to rallies, to virally advocate. Elected officials actually do respond when you jam their email box with thousands of letters telling them that they need to make a different decision.
When you lobby against a proposed cut, do you feel a responsibility to show where the revenue could come from another place?
We have historically done that. We were really active in the advocacy around personal income tax reform at the state level. But in this case, I feel like if this were a true priority of this administration, they would find the money. And I often use the example last year when the executive budget came out at the local level, the mayor put forward $2 billion in city tax levy resources into the Department of Education to prevent dramatic reductions that would have happened with the state budget. Here, we're asking for something like 160 million out of a $65 billion budget. If we wanted to make this happen, these cuts never would have been on the table. So we need to, before we tell them where to get the money, make sure that they hear loud and clear that New Yorkers at large think that this is a high priority.
You really know the budget process because you used to work for the budget department or whatever of the city council, right? Mm-hmm. Do they not always have hidden money in a budget?
I think that they have places where they know that there are more resources than they might need.
Yeah. And is it predicted that we're going to have a larger gap next year?
No. The budget is really quiet. I mean, we've not seen reductions in teachers in this budget. A lot of the things that typically, agitate the council body really haven't been identified. So these two cuts are really the largest cuts we're facing in the area of children's services.
And you could be really cheap and show an ignorance of the budget process by saying, we're getting all these bike lanes and we're getting all these little parks and all those things that are really nice, but still, we're not getting the childcare. But I assume that the parks and stuff come out of the capital budget. Is that true or not, do you think?
Yeah, investments in that kind of infrastructure as well.
But it would be nice to switch it, right? So you're gonna do with the other organizations this across-the-board organization of lobbying, and people can contribute or can be involved if they answer. There's a thing on your website to do that?
Yes, they can sign up to be an e-action member on www.cccnewyork.org.
What does that mean? Emails will come to them and tell them where they...
It means that they'll be notified when there's an action to take, whether you want to make a phone call, send an email, show up at a rally.
Right, and then the other thing is that they can look at your website and also enroll or apply for the courses that you give.
Yes, so there's the community leadership course that runs every fall,
and
the youth leadership course that runs every fall and spring.
And your website once more?
www.cccnewyorkspelledout.org.
And if you do participate in this organization, you will be part of a very long and proud tradition, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Before we leave, and I should have ended early, where do you take people on this quickly? Where do they go on a tour?
So they visit everything from child care centers to child welfare providers, preventive service providers, schools, hospitals, children's mental health clinics, juvenile justice facilities, the family court. I mean, every system that really touches the life of children and families in New York.
So everybody should please take this course. And thank you so much, Jennifer March-Joly. Thank you. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.